Okay. Yep, and we are live. Okay, let me scroll around.
Uh, I'm refreshing your YouTube page. Aha!
Yeah, see? Very fancy. Very fancy.
Wow. Oh, hold on. I can hear my voice with the delay.
Oh, yeah, you want to mute. You want to mute the stream. Tidy tidy. Let me find the link
Lol,
to
that's
it.
pretty good.
What is this?
What is what?
Okay, nothing. It's fine. We're
It's fine, it's
listen.
fine.
Okay,
Everything
I
is fine.
am, I am absolutely amazing at technology. So I know how to get shareable link and post it on Twitter. Let's
No, you don't.
go. Let's shit on Franxx. Let's go.
All right. All right. All right. All right. All right. Let me get into this mess.
Uh, wait. Let me grab our logo. Um, post a tweet. Pin the tweet.
Add everyone on our server.
Yeah. Add announcements.
Why do we have to create a channel to join the chat? What,
Uh,
really? That's lame. Can't even chat in my own live. All right, that's fine.
oops.
It's fine. I have a voice.
Okay. Uh, I kind of want to drop YouTube recommendations in the Kane Skittle server and just be like,
You can.
yeah, we're doing a live stream on Darling in the Franks. If anyone interested. Oh, should I paste the Twitter or should I just paste the link to the live stream?
Why not?
Okay.
It's fine. We can do a relatively chill thing. And I assume the live stream video will be left recorded for other people to see later.
Yeah, yeah. That's it. Okay. Yeah, yeah. That's it. Oh no, now I'm hearing my voice. Shh, 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 shh. It's okay. We're almost ready to start. Thanks for being patient. Uh, boom boom. Tarek breaks a new aspect ratio.
Very
All
proud of
right.
myself. And um, I can't that was a clever title.
I'm pretty happy with it. All right. That being said, hello.
Hello, 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 hello. This is the Critical Weeb Theory special live broadcast, which we are doing basically as an apology for missing a few video broadcasts this year.
Yeah, this is our big. We hope you accept the content that we are able to make. Um,
Hey, Jack, how's it going?
yeah, how's it going? How's it going, everyone? There's definitely gonna be. It usually takes a bit for people to come in, so we will save our hottest and spiciest takes for in just a little bit. But for now, I think it's a good time to say a couple thank yous. Well, first of all, if there's anyone who got this link from like a retweet or a Discord or whatever, and they're like, who are these assholes? I'm just here for Franks, right? Um, I'm a black. You see him. His pronouns. Uh, I do left wing anime essays, and sometimes I record them, and it's gotten out of hand, and I need help.
Um,
And this is
yeah,
my best friend since basically we were little kids. Um,
since we were very, very small,
yeah.
I'm Raghav. My pronouns are anything other than he or she, and I'm Mo's professional enabler.
That's true. No, I mean literally. I think if you go, basically every major essay I've written, they are credited with being both de facto editor and general smart person. So I really appreciate having them around. See, unlike in Franxx, when you have a childhood friend, it's like a normal and healthy relationship, and not like a weird submissive fetishized relationship in which
Oh,
there's
Franks.
all sorts of expectations
Yeah.
placed on people.
I think one place where we can start is just generally going over the background of where this video first formed. I remember back when before we recorded even the first episode of Critical Weeb Theory, um, we were talking about general bad anime. And for whatever reason, I brought up Conception, the video game,
Yeah.
and how, against all the odds, there was not
Hey,
only a
Titania.
Conception. Hello. How there was not only a single Conception 1, but also a Conception 2. And Mo went to look it up, and he found there
Hmm?
was the Conception anime.
Uh, hold on. I think the stream is being. It's
Is what,
being. It's giving me like weird notifications. The stream
oh,
hasn't gone offline for anyone, has it? It's still
no,
on,
it's
right?
working. Yeah.
Okay. I think it just had like a latency dip, but it's fine now. Sorry. Okay.
Carry
Just
on.
keep going. Carry on.
But yeah, so Conception. You want to talk about it?
Oh yeah. Long before critical weave theory was even, I think we in general had the idea of like we should probably do a video together at some point, but like the idea of just like doing like a dedicated podcast was still like not a thing. But I watched on a whim one episode only of Conception, and I was really it really fascinated me, because so Conception, in case you don't know, it's a video game that essentially is created for the express purpose of convincing young Japanese people that they need to go outside and have kids. Right? There's apparently three of these games. And they made an anime. It came out in fall 2018, and it currently has. I'm not one to put a lot of stock in MAL scores, but it has a 4.70 on MAL, which is atrocious. Like SAO and SAO2, I think, which are some of like the two most like culturally disliked anime in just in the fandom in general, are both like seven something and six something repeatedly. I think Master Ragnarok Lesser Vine Hediar is like a six something. Like a lot of really awful anime really don't get lower than like a six. So like the 4.7 is just a universal dislike for
To talk
Conception.
a bit about the premise of the show and the game itself, it is an isekai story in which protagonist guy has to make babies with various women and send them into dungeons as his star children to fight evil.
Yeah, so like it's not only that like having children is good, but having children is literally the thing that will save all of you, all like that will save like the entire universe from certain destruction. Right. So it's very on the nose.
Uh-huh.
And I
Like
watched the
there's
first
a bunch of
episode of Conception.
eugenics undertones with it. It's like an overall yuck piece.
Yeah, it's gross. But like I watched this episode and I had one thought in the back of my mind. And that thought was Conception. Okay. And this is going to be I can already feel the cancellation coming. No, I'm kidding. But Conception is not as bad as you would think. It's obviously very bad. It's like awful. It's like a really it's like a politically terrible piece of work, and it's like not written great, but it's not
Mhm.
like the worst written anime I think I've ever seen. Like not by a long shot. It is fairly coherent. The thing about conception that puts people off is not necessarily the bad writing, and I don't think it's necessarily the ideas being presented in conception. Is that it is so blatantly obvious with what it wants to do. Conception sits you down and it says, you know what would be good? Having fucking kids, you loser. Go grab a trad waifu and start pumping out babies like right now, right? And that's like conception, and people don't like it because it's like very open and like very obvious. And so my thinking was, if there was a show that was exactly like Conception, but just like a tiny bit more subtle with the message that it was trying to go across, I honestly think the show would be very, very popular with weebs. Imagine a show that has all of the same messages of please have kids, traditional gender roles are very good, blah blah blah, but they wrapped it in a sort of like they massaged it and say maybe instead of like an isekai fantasy, more of like a science fiction sort
You
of
could put
story.
robots in
You
it,
know, yeah, like robots, people like robots, they like mechs.
aliens.
What if there was like, instead of like a really generic looking man and a girl duo, there was like a eccentric female lead with like bright pink hair and like horns, and we're we're talking about Franxx, right? We're talking about Franxx. And Darling in Frankston actually came out the exact same year as Conception did. Just it came out in winter versus Conception came out in fall of 2018. And Darling in Franks was absurdly popular. It was it was the most hype show I think of the year. It reignited, I think, a lot of like really classic a lot of really classic anime fandom stuff, for example, Waifu Wars and Waifu Wars. I can't think of much else. But I sort of view Darling in the Franks, which I think we're gonna spend most of our time talking about, as like the good conception, by which I mean it's not good. It's terrible. It's not well written. I don't like the show. But what I mean is, it is the conception that massages its politics, not enough so that it's like not obvious, because it's still really obvious what it's doing,
Hmm.
but like enough that you don't like, especially if you're like kind of like a lonely sort of otaku guy that a lot of these shows are like aimed at, you're not it's like subtle enough for you to swallow, whereas Conception was just like trying to swallow a knife, right? um yeah, okay, so do we do plot summary next?
I
I feel like I've
Yes,
been
I
talking.
think we need to start. We should probably start if we're going to talk about what
Hello, hello,
Darling and
welcome to the
Franks
stream.
even is. We should start by talking about like what exactly is the premise of Darling and the Franks. Darling and the Franks takes does the impossible, and it takes Pacific Rim and makes it lame. That is, it takes the core concept of having robots, which two people must cooperate to ride, and instead of making it a thing about emotional intimacy and partnership, it just makes it about cis heteronormative sex, uh, which is
Thanks,
awkward.
Luke. We will exercise as many demons as we can as we possibly can. Um,
So,
yeah, that's a pretty good general summary. Specifically, what we have with Franks, we have, what does Franks want to be? I think that's a good and interesting question that you could write a whole thing on. But at its core, it's sort of, it's like a story inside another story. The story that's at the center is the story of the romance between the male and female lead. We have a male lead hero and a female lead 02. And the two of them are part of a squad of child soldiers who gear up to fight aliens in the robots that Rockwell described, called Franxx, and they must be piloted by male and female pairs. In the
For some unknowable reason.
if you see the position that the male and female pairs it's like Franxx isn't subtle. Like, if you see the position that the male and female pairs must ride, it's like definitely just like missionary style sex. And the I know I watched the dub because I'm like that, but like at least the first couple episodes, I'm not sure if like this was true in the original Japanese, but the first couple episodes are just like all the sexual innuendo while they're driving the robots. And so it kind of follows. So all of these kids, essentially, they're kind of locked away from like knowledge that we would think are pretty standard, right? They don't really know what puberty is. They don't really know what sex is. They've been like divorced from the world of like romantic and sexual intimacy. And so I guess the idea is that like all the pent up emotions that would normally go into high school angst and drama instead goes into being able to pilot the Franxx. They're genetically engineered to like,
Somehow.
yeah, they're genetically engineered to like live for a short amount of time, pilot the Franxx, and then like die at the age of like 20 or something.
Hmm.
But in that backdrop, we have Hero and 02. 02 is like a genetic experiment, and Hero is like, well, they're all genetic experiments, but 02 is like a genetic experiment in the sense that she's like not human. We'll get to it. And we have Hero, who is also exceptional, and they find that the two of them are the only people who can pilot a Franxx together. And it kind of follows the romance that they develop as they realize that they were basically meant for each other, their childhood friends, so on and so forth. So that's like the core emotional arc of
Yeah.
Darling in the Franxx. But then there's another story on top of it. And that story is just an intense scorn and hatred for like all things. Right. It is a story about society, and essentially how Frank sees society was ruined by a whole list of people.
I Yes.
Who
And I think
ruins it?
before we get too deep into the weeds of that, one
Hmm.
thing I want to point out is one of the most obvious questions that comes up very early in Franx's presentation, where the question is, well, if these robots and writing these robots is a metaphor for sex, and gay people exist, can gay people get in the robot of Darling in the Franxx?
No.
At first, it seems like it might offer anything other than the heteronormative answer, but actually, it turns out that the strict gender coding on of Darling the Franxx is actually a good thing and somehow a deviation from the norm. And this is something we'll get into later.
Yeah.
But Darling in the Franxx frames our main squad's unique strict gender roles and cis heteronormativity as a good thing that allows them to pilot the Franxx better than the other people.
Right.
And this comes out a lot in what can only be considered Darling in the Franxx's like homophobia and transphobia. I think there's a moment where one of the characters, she wants to ride in Franxx with another girl, and they try it, and it fails spectacularly.
Yeah, her name's
And
Ikuno.
yeah,
Yeah.
And the end result is that Ikuno gets trolled. Yeah, well, of course, Epistle has to write in Franxx. And this is, I think, the warning signs are there until that point. With Darling in the Franxx's intentions become.
Your mic has. I think you've
Oh,
been dropping out a
no.
little bit.
No.
We'll give that just a sec. Sorry about that.
Is it working?
Yeah, okay, you're good.
Cool, cool. Let's carry on. But yeah.
You said you were describing Ikuno and how she wants to ride in a Franxx with Ichigo because she loves her,
Yeah.
and it's just like, no, like the Franxx doesn't allow this. This is
Yeah. It's, or I think the thing I would want to point out
mhm.
is that this is very much a narrative position that Franks is taking, where it's like, it's not, it's creating a world in which homosexuality is strictly not allowed within the confines of the narrative. It's
Well,
literally.
I want to complicate this a little bit, not too much, because
Mhm.
I think you're essentially right on that point. But just because I have seen like it is my duty to do fandom research, and so I have seen like what fandoms have kind of talked about Ikuno and like how the story handles like gay people in general. And so what people will say is that Franks does have some sympathy for its gay characters, in the sense that it doesn't in the sense that it doesn't literally want to just kill them all, I guess. And I'll explain what
Right.
I mean in just a second. Because essentially what it argues is that it is very sad to be in the position of like being gay in society, because in a sense your attraction is not useful for society's main goal, which in this case is piloting Franks, but in real life would be like, I guess, making children.
Well,
And
like,
so we don't hate
I
you or
would go a
anything,
step
and you are
further.
allowed to exist. However, you're
Yeah.
like the hierarchy between like homosexuality and heterosexuality is very clear, and it is very, yeah, essentially, sure, you can be gay, but you're
I would
just
go a
societally
step
impotent because of it. Yeah.
further to say that in Darling in the Franks, getting in the robot to save the world is a metaphor for having babies.
Oh yeah.
And so while Darling in the Franks doesn't hate anyone who, for example, um, is homosexual or whatever, or gay or lesbian or trans, it hates anyone who doesn't want to have babies. It hates gay people who aren't willing to go in the closet and get into straight relationships with other people.
Yeah, that's just kind of um I kind of I blame this a little bit on I think a lot of anime fans. I notice this a lot when I like try to talk about like race issues, but I am still like a cis dude, and so noticing it with like other issues has been a little bit more difficult. But I do notice it quite a bit. Yeah, we will get to that. But essentially, there's a big tendency, I think, among weaves to like just sort of when it comes to like issues of representation, to just kind of like settle for like anything. So for example, in Franks, the fact that there is a gay character and she's not like absolutely despised or whatever is like good enough, you know. It's doing a good job, right? And like a lot of straight people, I think, will speak over like the experiences of like LGBT people and say, yeah, like, yeah, Frank's, it's just doing great. It's doing fine. It's doing good. It's doing well. And it's like, well, why don't we like sit and like analyze this further? Like, what is the show actually saying about what is the show actually saying when it juxtaposes like all of the straight relationships that create children in the show with the kinds of relationships that do not create children.
Yeah.
Okay.
But talking about the way Franks treats its relationships is a stepping stone in talking about, I think, I hesitate to say it's something deeper, but another issue that is the way Darling in the Franks treats gender. Um, so one of the things that we know about Darling in the Franks, from one of their very early episodes, is that there is a very strict, like, gender normative dress code, right? Where the boys wear Y's on their ties and the girls wear X's on their ties, et cetera, et cetera. Each of them has a very specific place in the Franks, as to who's mounting and who's being mounted. And
Sorry. It's so stupid.
it is really bad.
Please continue.
But at first, I remember one of the things I was reading about Darling in the Franxx, because I watched it as it was coming out, was that, well, Darling in the Franxx has room to be critical of these gender rules, and it does, by presenting these roles as the norm, from which, there are exceptions. Like Zero Two is presented as someone who doesn't neatly fit into these strict gender roles. But then it turns out, in a very, I think, to my mind, baffling artistic direction, that our group of protagonists that know about gender, or at least have some conception of gender, conception, um, some conceptualization of gender, are the exceptions to the rule, whereas a majority of the society is a gender abolitionist society where people can form either as, the mounted person or the
Or the
context of the
Mountie.
Franks.
You are cutting out again?
Boop boop.
Okay. I think you're good. Keep going.
Yeah. Yeah, like Luke says, like, there are a couple of times where a woman tops the guy in the Franks and the series treats it as barely functional, if at all. And even in those relationships, like, it's very, like, confined to these specific things. You want to talk about the nines for a bit?
Oh, yeah. I want to talk about the nines and also begin to introduce an idea that I think chat has already brought up, which is good. Um, and it's just sort of how there's a definite split in the story from episodes 1 to 15 and then episode 16 to what is it, 24. I think both in terms of like the production team, there were like massive changes that took place there, but also story wise, like the focus of the story shifts from being a story about Zero Two to being a story more about society in general. So how did the nines fit into this? So basically, I mentioned earlier that Zero Two is a
Well, who are the nines?
yeah. I'm getting into it.
All right.
So I mentioned earlier that Zero Two is like like a genetic experiment. Okay, I'm gonna get into lore, and I always feel bad getting into lore because explaining lore to me is just like it shouldn't really be necessary if the show is like good, but we got to do it. So um, Franks posits that back before humans, there was another intelligent race called Klaxosapiens, who got into a war with a group of aliens called Verm. And these sapiens formed male-female pairs to like become weapons to like fight off the alien invasion. And these weapons buried themselves deep in the ground and became Klaxosaurs. Zero Two is a clone of the last remaining Klaxosapien, which is the whole thing about her not being human. And the nines are also clones of various Klaxosapiens. The nines, they are described essentially as being able to take the position of either male or female Franks drivers. They cannot reproduce, as in they cannot like make children, but they are like interchangeable parts of like the Franxx piloting system, and as such, they not only have no conception of gender, but they are like actively anti-gender. They see gender as only a thing that only kind of matters when you talk about who's piloting the Franxx in which position, and that's literally about it. So to us as socialists, we're like, that's pretty cool. They're like bucking societal trends, right? But Franxx fucking hates these people. Franxx despises the nines, because
Well,
essentially,
Franks treats not conforming to gender roles as alien.
yeah. So
Franks
that's
treats
the
sterility as alien, and this is very critical of literally the big evil bad guys of Ape who control the society of Darling and the Franks are aliens, and their plan is mass sterility and
in
removing the
exchange for
concept of
happiness and also communism. But
yeah,
we'll get to it.
removing the concept of gender from people, right? That's
Yeah,
literally what the aliens are doing. And so it's very interesting, or interesting insofar as it's perhaps a bit concerning, that Darling and the Franks' conceptualization of what humanity is like humans to Darling and the Franks are beings that procreate and beings
yeah,
that wants to procreate. And so if you're sterile or gay or lesbian or like outside of those strict confines, Franks literally views you as alien. And that's not, I don't have to reach because it's literally the aliens.
yeah. The aliens say so. The aliens like say as much. Uh, the aliens are the one who like criticize humanity and its differences in gender and sex. It's a little bit hard to talk about like what Frank sees as gender and what Frank sees as sex because
I
of
don't
course the show
think
sees the things as the same thing.
I don't
But
think Franks actually can tell.
yeah, so we'll do our best to explain this properly. But uh, what the nines do and what understanding Zero Two's origins do is it kind of turns. Sorry. Okay. It kind of turns what would be Zero Two's story. If you take a look at it from episode 1 to episode 15, her story is essentially one that we've seen with female characters many times before, of essentially what a girl needed in her life was to just find the man that she needs, right? And so she's got like a lot of angst and a lot of pent up frustrations, and she's antagonistic with the rest of her peers, and so on and so forth, up
It's
until she
framed as a
finally finds
story
Hero,
of
her
Zero
darling.
to becoming human,
Right.
isn't it?
Through like meeting a man, which is already bad on its own.
Through
But
conforming to society's standards of what a woman should be.
yeah. But if you also now consider that Zero Two is a nine, and so at least and this is one of the problems with Franks of not like differentiating between gender and sex, because do we read the nines as intersex or do we read them as non-binary or do we read them as both? We don't know. We can't, because Franks is just that awful. But nonetheless, Franks is either, she can be read as either intersex or non-binary, and then her story therefore is her becoming more human by rejecting her classification as neither male or female, and slotting neatly into a specifically female gender role. There is a line. Gosh, I wish I'd written this down, but there is a line somewhere where Zero Two basically mentions how she can't have children, and this disappoints her a little bit because she would obviously like to be able to fully participate in, I guess, what Franxx would consider the female experience, with the ability to have children with Hero. But like she can't. She can just get as close to it as humanly possible, and the fact that she can align herself to a specific gender role makes her both more human and more complete. So there's that.
Yeah. And oh boy, does Darling and the Franxx have a lot to say about gender. I think there is a bit to say, especially as it relates to the double standard it has between male and female characters. You can probably speak to this a bit more since you paid more attention to the discourse surrounding the show, but especially as it relates to Hero pursuing 02 versus Ichigo pursuing Hero.
Oh yeah. Oh, that's actually a really
Yeah.
you gave me an
There's
idea.
the gender double standard.
You gave me a really interesting idea. So we didn't have this written down, but I'll try my best to explain it. I know there is, and I've actually yet to watch this full thing, but there's like a really influential Darling and the Franxx analysis that kind of talks a little bit about like how the change in direction affected the series. And I think while it is noticeable, the fact remains that I don't think it is such a difference that the story from episodes 1 to 15 does not lead into the story from episode 16 to 24. Right? I think there is still continuity there. Like the continuity of all of Franxx's regressive themes are still present at the beginning of the show as they are at the end of the show. They're like they build on each other, not the context.
In
But
a sense, I think the trajectory, the beginning of the show presents an idea, and it's possible for that idea to say, no, all of these gender roles are bad and we need to go against it. But that's not the ideas Franxx presents about those gender roles within the story, I think.
yeah, I mean, to be honest, from the first episode where they talked about the Xian and like the male and female bird leaning on each other, it's just it was always going to be a story about like the wonders and the magic of like straight romance and baby making. Whether or not it was going to get to this extent of we hate literally everyone who does not fit into this paradigm, and they're all like useless to society, and they're all like attacking our values of straight baby making, I think perhaps is up to debate. But that general gosh, I'm blanking out on words. But the general thrust and lionization of this type of relationship, I think, has always been in Franxx. But we were gonna talk about the double standard of like male men expressing sexuality versus women expressing sexuality. So I've been thinking a lot about Ichigo, right? Because when I watched Franxx, I didn't hate Ichigo. Like I went into Franxx
She was
knowing,
pretty cool, actually.
yeah, I went into Franxx knowing that people hated Ichigo because she kissed Hiro at some point. That's all I knew. And to be honest, like the moment that Ichigo kissed Hiro, like doesn't even register to me as like an important part of Franxx. It kind of doesn't matter. In terms of like the analysis of like what the show does, I think, because it was always just like the kind of rival relationship in the love triangle, and like shows just have yeah, like Ichigo is fine. Shows just have like love triangles because they think they need them. Like a lot of stories do this. Essentially, for those who are less aware, Ichigo is also Hiro's childhood friend. She's not main girl, so obviously she doesn't end up with Hiro. She likes Hiro. There's this other guy, Goro, who likes her. And then Ikuno also likes her. So it's like a love star. It's very painful. But fans absolutely hated her. And there's a moment in episode 14 where she heard that Zero Two and Hiro kissed. So she tries to kiss Hiro too. To Hiro too. She tries to also kiss Hiro so that she can have that same sort of connection with Zero Two that Zero Two has with him. But it like doesn't work obviously because like Hiro and Zero Two are like destined for each other or whatever, right? But fans, they like fucking lost their shit over this. Like they actually lost their minds. They fans like Japanese fans, Western fans, and Chinese fans apparently all sent like death threats to everyone who worked on Franxx, telling them you should cancel your show, you should like go off yourself. I can't believe like you would allow Hiro to, I mean Ichigo to do this, blah blah blah, this and that. And I kind of wondered because up until Ragwa brought this up, I was like, how do I bring this into the conversation? Like, why do the weebs get so get so pissy about this? But then I just realized as we were talking, like, it's because of the double standard that Franxx puts up, right? In general, because Franxx has like specific like built-in gender roles, like the idea of I think a woman being like the initiator of like sexual contact is like inherently unnatural to Franxx. And one of the ways we know that is before episode 15 when Zero Two like resolves all their problems. She's very very sexually forward with Hiro. Like she's constantly trying to initiate sex when he like doesn't really know what it is. She's like very open like about her sexuality. She's very like domineering and dominant. But like in all of these scenes, these are like framed as like negative things. They're framed as like part of what makes her unhuman and part of what makes her like incomplete. And afterwards, she's like very, very, very submissive, right? She's essentially, I mean, she's Hiro's wife basically. They don't get married in the show, but she basically takes the role of like Hiro's second, right? And with likewise with Ichigo, when Ichigo is forward with Hiro, she's also punished both by the fan base, but like also by the story, which essentially says you're not allowed to be with Hiro because you're not filling the proper role. If Hiro wanted you, he would come to you, and he doesn't. He wants Zero Two. So there's that. The end. Bye. I went on for a bit, so I want Raghuva to take it. I think
Yeah,
I
no,
need
that I think is a pretty interesting and important point to understand about the way Darling in the Franxx treats of gender roles. But equally, I think interesting to me is the way in which Darling in the Franxx presents its gender roles as you need the liberatory power of cis heteromantic love conforming to strict gender roles to free you from the repressive structures of gender abolition.
Oh yeah,
Which is, I think,
yeah.
it's a terrible argument, but it's one of the most interesting arguments to argue for traditional gender roles. Because generally, the argument people will make, right, is they'll say, all of this new stuff is too complicated. We need to go back to the old ways when it was simpler. But Darling in the Franxx frames gender abolition not as a villainous threat coming to take away your gender roles, but as the norms. So we need to somehow, revolutionize the world in order to bring back housewives.
Right. I think
And I think that's such a terrible. It's fascinating to me how Darling in the Franxx frames it that way, and how odd of a position it is to take. And I think it makes sense. I I think it makes sense in the context of the way a lot of conservatives frame the world of like, everyone these days is getting into quote unquote gender stuff or whatever.
Oh, have you seen the meme that's like it's like a conservative meme of like how many genders are there or whatever? And then like there's
Mhm.
the scientist who's just kind of nervous to answer behind a giant gun that is cancel culture in the background.
Right. I mean,
Like yeah, but
it,
like it's like the conservatives who think that somehow like gender activists have like infiltrated like the highest levels of like society and they like run the world and like the poor innocent straights and cisses are the ones that are being that are being oppressed. When it's like, I mean, just statistically, this is not true. Like, trans people are more likely to be houseless. They're more likely to be poor. Like,
Mhm.
they're they're
Right.
not represented in a ton of media, and when they are, there's always like a big drama out of it. We literally are just in the process of electing like, and not to say that liberal representation is something that we're after, but like we just started electing trans representatives in the United States, and like on a global scale, of course, the idea of like trans people is still like that still gets you like killed in a lot of places. So
Yeah. To frame trans representation as somehow boring and old, and to frame cis heteronormativity as a countercultural revolution.
yeah,
What an and Darling in the Franks isn't even the only that does this. I remember there was that Game Inform that I think I showed you. I will go find it.
yeah, go ahead.
Uh, you can keep talking, but there was this. Um,
Well, okay. So while you look for it, I'll just I think one of my favorite moments watching Frank's in
I found it.
okay, cool. So you do it first and then I'll go into the one.
But there was this Game Inform RPG site actually review of Haven, which they framed as an enjoyable romantic RPG, but to quote from the article, it feels odd for the game to paint the sole homosexual representation as an antagonistic force against the freedom to love who you want to love, especially in an era where better LGBTQ plus representation should be pushed for.
Yeah.
Um, I will ping this to you so you can put it in chat.
Yeah.
But
I'll put it in
I
chat
think,
and I'll
yeah,
put it in
gender,
the
and I think it is interesting how a lot of works written by are able to frame non-heteroromantic relationships as somehow like oppressive or antagonistic to the freedom of loving who you want to love. I guess this is the same sort of philosophy that comes from someone who's like, oh no, all of these lesbian people are taking away all of the hot girls.
oh yeah, or like um or I don't know if I have a better example of
Like
that.
that's just such a like that's such a yuck take, but a lot of cis
Or
people
oh,
do
okay.
feel like that.
Or like I guess the other thing would be uh like Elliot Page came out recently, and a lot
Mm-hmm.
of people saying like a lot of like cis women being like, "Ugh, can't we just we lost another like lesbian, right?"
Mm-hmm.
So it's like pitting like trans people against like cis gay people and saying like, "Oh well, it's bad for our community when this other community wins." When it's like, no, it's not. It's not. Like no, you're just wrong. Like I don't know how to say that.
Right. The difference between like the freedom to love whoever you want and being entitled to other people's love is, I think, the nuance that occurs with Darling and the Franks here, right?
Right, exactly. I was just gonna mention the wedding, right? So there's these two characters, Kokoro and Mitsuru, who are oh man, this also just brings up the fat phobia, but that's okay. We are like slowly running down the list of all the people that Darling and the Franxx has like an intense hatred for. But there are these two characters, Kokoro and Mitsuru, who are essentially ships for most of the series, and their whole thing is that they want to get into a traditional marriage and have a baby the natural way, right? And so eventually, they get married, right? And they're just about to exchange vows and rings and stuff. And then it's so ridiculous. Like the nines come in, like the people we mentioned earlier, along with like a heavily armored police squad to stop this wedding from taking place because we live in the dystopia in which like the non-binary gender police will stop you from marrying who you want and having a child. And like just the melodrama of these people coming in with like guns to stop the only wedding that has happened in nearly like 2 centuries of the show's universe is just it was so unbelievably ridiculous to me. I couldn't stop laughing. But
Right.
it is
And
like
it's
the
like it's especially appalling when you put it in contrast with like actual lesbian weddings or actual gay weddings, which have had people with guns show up to
yeah,
interfere with them, right? In a world where real world homophobia still exists, in a world where all of that is like, it's not safe for gay people to marry each other, why is your idea of a wedding that pisses off the secret police a hetero one?
right.
What's going on, Franks?
It is
And it's just another way in which this idea of love being under attack is co-opted, because Darling in the Franxx' idea of love is love that results in procreation. And their idea of love being under attack is not gay people, lesbian people, non-binary people, all people from the LGBTQIA plus spectrum feelings of attraction being under attack and repressed by society. It's, oh no, people aren't making babies.
yeah,
That's Darling in the Franxx' idea of love is under attack.
yeah. And that's kind of
Fucked up.
it's fucked up, but it's fucked up in a way that is very funny. I don't know. I can't stop. I I'm not sure if it was because I think certainly before episode 15 there were a few moments here and there that I thought maybe weren't good, but where the show perhaps had promise. I couldn't really name them off the top of my head. I can only really think of the negatives, but they were some that sort of made me go, "Oh, okay." Here's one. The episode where one of the kids gets stuck living with like what the humans have become, and they're kind of like just these like immortal beings who like don't talk to their spouses and like live lives of like solitude, and they get happiness from like the happiness chamber or whatever, and they like don't really understand youth anymore and stuff like that because they've been living for so long. I thought that in a different show could have been fun. The idea of like, I think like a corporate mass produced eternal happiness
I
versus
think Jack is just incredibly, it sums it up very succinctly,
oh
and
yeah,
conservatives want to be oppressed so bad.
they really do.
Anyway, carry on.
Yeah, right. And so there are like little moments like that that were not awful, but they needed to be like incorporated into into a story that works, right? Into a story that is not just like so openly fetishistic of like one specific kind of human interaction, which is like cis men and cis women get into a romantic relationship for the purpose of having children, right? Which is like not even I think it's easy to talk about like all like not only easy but like probably the most important to talk about like all like the LGBT people that Franxx does not like, right? Simply because they do not fit in. But I think it's important to it not as important, but it is interesting to note that like this kind of gender essentialism also doesn't like you if you're cis and straight and still for whatever reason don't fit into like this paradigm of like
I mean,
procreation
it
is the most
hates
important thing.
cis het ace people.
Yeah, or like cis hetero people. Like if there is something like broken with you or like wrong with you if you're like just not really into like
Or even if you like want to focus on your career and like not have kids.
yeah, the story like doesn't like you, or yeah,
The
um,
robot getting in the for making babies. And if you can't make
I think you're gonna have to
and
repeat that.
getting in the robot in Darling in the Franxx is a metaphor for making babies. And if you can't make babies or you try to make babies the wrong way, you can't get in the robot. And Darling in the Franxx hates anyone who isn't going to get in the robot. So if you're gay and you're still willing to get in this metaphorical robot, Darling in the Franxx is okay with you. But like we mentioned in our latest Critical Weeb Theory episode before this one, it only accepts you insofar as you conform to, yeah, and also sterile people, like
Yeah,
Tanya said. But Darling the Franks only accepts you insofar as you conform to strict heteronormative gender roles, right? It's very much that whole like don't ask, don't tell.
yeah, exactly. And um, where are we on the list? We made some good headway. Oh, okay. So, do we want to talk about how it fails as propaganda? But I kind of wanted to run. Um, I wanted to do a real quick thing on just how the show doesn't like its one overweight character,
Yeah.
and then we can yeah. Um, gosh, I'm bad with names. Uh, Futoshi, was that his name?
Yeah, I
Yeah,
think
yeah,
so.
okay, Futoshi. Right. So Futoshi is he's one of the people in like the child soldier squad, right? Um and he happens to be overweight. And I swear on my Yeezys, every single time, every single time this dude is in frame, he's like eating something, right? And like every joke around this character is about him and food. And like the first couple of times it happened, I was like, okay, this is a thing that happens in some anime. That's fine. But it is in Franks. It is like obsessive. It is wild. Just how thorough Franks is like uh, uh, disgust for this one specific character is. It really made me uncomfortable just watching the show. Um, there's a point somewhere in the middle where like the people who run the child army like stop sending supplies to the kids for a little bit, and the dude like develops like an eating disorder, and it's just it never comes back again. So it's like not it's not handled with like any of the kind of care or respect. Yeah, he has no character outside food. Um, I think also the fact that like he was Kokoro's original partner and he like loved her, but like Kokoro rejected him in favor of like a skinnier guy Mitsuru. Like I think it's hard because in general stories about people who like someone and then get rejected aren't really problematic. But in the context of like Futoshi and just like how absolutely shafted he is by the narrative the entire time, I can't help but see this as one like okay, so like not only not only because he's like the only character who's like more than willing to fit into like the cis heteronormative like romantic paradigm of the show, but he's still punished for it because he still has like a deviant body type, and so that's like not enough. The show says go fuck yourself, please.
Hmm.
Right, like just
It's
the
very fat
narrow,
phobic in
yeah,
its framing.
like the narrow specificity of like what kind of person Franks wants you to be, otherwise you're ruining society, is honestly stunning. I think especially when looked through the lens of Futoshi. Oh, okay. And I know I've been prattling, but okay, communism, and then we'll get to the propaganda. I promise. Right.
Okay.
Okay. So Verm, they're like communists, right? But they're
Are they?
like, well,
What
I
makes them
think it's
communist?
I think it's good to read. Wants to have a trad life. Yeah, the narrative won't let Futoshi have his trad wife. But what makes Verm communist? I think I was watching the last couple episodes, and they talked about how like in their utopia, everyone would be equal because there'll be no differences among people and like no suffering. And I'm like, yeah, okay. It's communism, right? It's still
It's
it's like the
communist scaremongering.
yeah, the idea of like a totalitarian dictatorship that like promises equality by snuffing out individuality and snuffing out the differences and their gender roles that make us human, is definitely like communist fear mongering, which kind of surprised me because it's like at the very end of the show. So the idea that that Franks had more steam to just hate more different kinds of people was very funny to me. But I think what's interesting is that if you look at the society that Franks creates, so basically, what Franks does is it sort of says that like when it kind of chronicles how humanity got to the point where there's like gender police everywhere and like people have immortality and no one can reproduce, it kind of talks about like how corporate power led to this shift, right? It says corporations started offering immortality to the rich, and then people started supporting like eugenics programs basically for the poor. And then as this continued, eventually the entire world became immortal, and like the poor just like languished in poverty until they all died off, right? So there's that. So when Franks considers, all right, the post the post dystopia society that it wants to build, the society that it builds is one in which people produce with according to their ability, and they get, and they receive in accordance to their need, in which goods are publicly owned, in which decisions are made collectively. Like the utopia that Franks posits is
They even
indeed a
got rid of
communist utopia.
gender.
Yeah,
They
it.
even got rid of gender.
Oh no, they don't get rid of gender. All the women have like tons and tons and tons of babies. It's a communist society, but just women are consigned to just making babies forever.
Uh-oh.
It's yeah, it's the one is the one is the one caveat for that. So I find it really, I think it's just like a testament of how conservatives, like, they will fearmonger about communism, but like the intuitive understanding of what a better future would look like is indeed just communism. And even conservatives know that. What they're actually concerned about is like power over people. Like, okay, I'm really sorry. I've been talking. Like in Franks, like they've discovered how to make babies without actually using pregnancy. Right. So if Franks wanted to argue that the only thing we need is more children, this technology would be a godsend. Finally, people who would otherwise not be able to have children can have children. But what Franks wants is not just people having babies, but like the specific limitations that come when you say that women need to like give birth and that women need to raise children. Like that's the specific thing.
It
So
makes
like,
sense in the
yeah,
context of the propaganda Darling in the Franks is trying to push, which is apparently convincing weebs that women should leave the workplace and make babies in order to solve underpopulation crises, if I'm reading that correctly.
Yeah, it's a little bit weird. Like, if your only concern was that we needed kids and we needed people to raise them, would it not also make sense to like give a few kids to like the gay couples and like the polycules and other sorts of communities, like because I guess what I'm saying is that when conservatives say they want people to have kids, it's not just that they want people to have kids. It's the fact that you can use people having kids to control people, which is what they actually want. Like, they're perfectly okay with like the economic like equality of communism, so long as the rigid gender hierarchy is maintained. They don't really care about the means of production. At least this specific strain of like conservatism. There's obviously plenty of conservatives who are very much interested in like maintaining capitalism and that sort of hierarchy as well. But Franxx is an interesting exception to that rule and looked at through that lens. Okie dokie. So I'll let you take on propaganda for just a little bit.
All right. Um, what is there to say about Darling in the Franxx as propaganda that we haven't already said? I think what I'm most interested in is, does Darling in the Franxx, what is, or I guess, what is Darling in the Franxx's idea of propaganda? What world is it trying to sell people on? And who is it peddling that fantasy for? Interestingly, I think Darling in the Franxx is a fantasy oriented towards a presumed male audience. That much is, I think, fairly obvious in its framing of its female characters and whatever, and the male fantasy. But then the question is, who is it trying to persuade? Is it trying to persuade its predominantly presumed male audience who is lonely that what they should get is a girlfriend and start making babies? But I guess what I'm trying to say is, Darling in the Franxx is sort of trying to cut out women in a conversation about having relationships and making babies. And it's, who are they trying to convince and to what end? This is a question that bothers me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think what you said about like cutting out women from like a conversation about like relationships is really interesting. Because well, okay, because what
It's
Franxx
not.
does is essentially it sort of argues that like its strict like gender roles give people purpose. Like the gay girl Ikno, um, the reason why she defends gender hierarchies from the nines, and again, like this is another example, like pitting like non-binary people against like binary LGBT people. But the reason why she gets so upset about it is essentially that like um, the fact that she loves women, even if it's not directly useful to society, like the classification of herself as a woman, even if like one that is like kind of not as useful, is still like important to her. But it feels very much as like pushing that classification onto women. It's like, to the men, you'll totally get this awesome trad wife who loves and respects you if only society cared about making babies again. And then to the woman, it's all, well, I promise you'll find your purpose. I swear, it'll happen. Or maybe it's actually telling the men that this is what the woman will get to convince them as well. I'm not really sure which one is which. Does that make sense?
There's a worse interpretation of 02 and the nines based around the context of Japanese social policies. Immigrants.
Immigrants.
That's a reading.
That is a take. I have not actually. I haven't really thought about Franxx in terms of immigration quite as much as I've thought about Franxx in terms of like gender and sex.
The reading is there, right? Because
Yeah.
these are aliens who are, I mean, like the Klaxosaurs are literally aliens who are not humans who are integrating into human society.
Mm.
If we say humans are a parallel for the native Japanese population and Klaxosaurs are immigrants, then
Mm.
those Klaxosaurs that conform to quote unquote traditional Japanese values in big conservative scare quotes are that, right?
Yeah. And actually, if you think about it, if you think about the ending of the show, the Claxosaurs basically like um, devote their lives to beating Verm, and then they just bury underground and kind of like die to like let the humans do whatever they want with the Earth, right? So there's kind of a social expectation of immigrants to just sacrifice themselves for the glory of Japan and then like leave, so that Japanese people can go back to what they were doing, right? Um, so that's an interesting reading. You can find reading after reading after reading. I guess the very last thing that we have to say, and I guess we'll do a kind of open air conversation with Chet, and then we'll sign off for the year. But I guess the last thing we have to say is that like whether it's Franks or like Conception, the one thing that really shocks us is how unappealing these shows make the thing that they're trying to make appealing. Like like I'm a cis dude, right? And I do like women. Spoilers, shocker. So presumably Franks is for me, right? Presumably Franks is trying to make the argument that I should have children, and I actually quite like children. I'm not one of the people who say like, oh, don't have kids because climate change, right, or stuff like that. I think kids are pretty cool, and I think they're very cute. But when I watch Franks, it kind of makes me like never want to go into a relationship ever. Right? Because it just feels suffocating. Right? The idea that like my relationship with my partner is like one of like control, in which I just like use her body basically to like make a child, and that's like the entire purpose of my life. And the idea that like the only way that I'm allowed to relate to this person is like through the context of a romantic relationship, and through this and through that. And if you look the wrong way, or you say the wrong thing, or you do the wrong thing, then you're actually a threat to like stop. Stop. It's like I'm not sure what kind of argument for what the show presumably says it wants to do, which is encourage like childbirth, is actually being made with like restrictions and like rules and like regulations. This was the same thing with Conception. Like in the episode of Conception that I watched, it was basically like the guy he was basically forced to have like sex for the first time with a girl while everyone was watching, and the fate of the world rested on their ability to make a child. And that's not romantic. That's just suffocating endless pressure from society to do something that you don't want to do, you know? And I don't know, I guess if you want people to enjoy relationships, and this is all relationships, like friendships, like gay relationships, straight relationships, whatever, like polyamorous relationships, if you want people to enjoy them, just let them. Don't, like, I promise you, if you just let people be, children will be made. It's a natural thing that happens. And if you give people the resources to raise those children and take care of them, instead of like condemning them with poverty and like climate annihilation, they will do so happily and gladly. There's no need for this like excessive like nitpicking and pressure in order to force people to do the thing that you want them to do. Okay.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I guess we turn this over to chat. Is there anything about Franxx you wanted our opinion on?
How are y'all feeling? I know Chad is, I think, on a bit of a delay from where we are.
Yeah, so we'll wait a bit to come in. Oh, right, the atheists. Oh, yeah, the show hates atheists because it kind of paints them as responsible for, because it's like their atheistic science that allowed the immortality to become born in the first place. So, yeah, no. I'm pretty sure it's capitalism. And capitalism cares not about religion or a religion. It just makes what's profitable.
Mm-hmm. We've been going for 75 minutes.
Yeah. But what else? Was there other little things? The part about the PC police crashing straight weddings is still equally hilarious and disturbing. Yeah.
I mean, it's even more disturbing when you consider that that's literally a worldview people have.
Yeah, it is unfortunately very effective.
Will there be more non-CWT content this year? Well,
Yes.
there's a
I'm
great
trying.
video on the Misfit at Demon Academy.
Yeah, at least that video. The goal the goal is that video, my video on Ethiopia, and the rest of Bullshit No Yisha by the end of the year. It's kind of ambitious, but that is the goal. Some form of those four things will be released by the end of the year. So there will be at least a couple of things. Would you watch? Yeah, I would. The thing is, this week was finals week for me, so I couldn't really commit to like a 3 hour. Okay, let me actually answer the question. So, yes, there will be more non CWD content before the end of the year. I will watch.
I'm trying to make stuff happening depending on how good and or bad they go.
Yeah. I will watch the Franxx analysis at some point soon. My feeling is that I think while I maybe might pick up a couple of other things about the first 15 episodes that I maybe didn't think of before, if I'm honest, I don't really buy necessarily the idea that like Franxx could have been good if the rest of the episodes after 15 were like the same as the first 15. I think it still would have been, because like the logical conclusion of, I think even like the politics of the first 15 episodes is still like a lot of what ended up happening. Like Zero Two's transformation from non-human to human is still problematic, even if the Nines are not nearly as despised as they were. Like, to make a better Franxx, you need to redo it from like the ground up, where it's not just like male bird and female bird need each other to survive, but like a more general commentary on like capitalism and how it commodifies relationships. Oh yeah, like the Misfit at Demon Academy has like no tension in it whatsoever. It has no tension. Like, I don't. And people write stories like this.
But will you ever believe that
Um, yeah, I mean, like the thing about it is that like for example, like Kill la Kill, does Kill la Kill like subvert fascism? Like, I don't really think so. I think it just does it normally, right? So when you're like, uh, if you're saying like Franxx could have subverted its politics like Kill la Kill did, it's like, yeah, it can. And which is to say, Kill la Kill failed to subvert its politics, and Franxx probably would have too. I don't know. I need to watch the analysis to. If Hero is
Would I
female,
agree? Would that fix? No, I think is my answer. Uh, no, contextually, because underlying, right? It is just a birth metaphor that's going on in Darling in the Franks. So, in order for Hero to just be a female character, if you literally only changed Hero into a female character and changed nothing else, I think all of the problems are the same. If you want to have tried and reinterpret the story, then you need to change a lot more than just like one character's gender.
if Hero is female, are you saying that like 02 would stay female, and their relationship would be like gay? Because that like changes. That doesn't change everything, but it changes quite a bit. Actually, I think that would just make the politics of the show entirely like incoherent, because you would still have all of the
Because
gender essentialism stuff, but then like the main relationship would be like lesbian.
yeah.
Okay, but I think a version of Franxx that could work is Hero is a girl, 02 is also a girl. The story is actually about how this unprecedented female to female pair is actually very effective at fighting the Franks. And instead of it being about 02 finding humanity, it's about her finding community. And the show ends at episode 15. I think that could be a really interesting version of Darling in the Franks. Also, we
And
don't just hate
instead of the
non-binary people.
show, well, and instead of the show being about the importance of procreation, the show was about how maybe relationships that aren't built on procreation are still valid and important, right?
Yeah,
That's fun because fundamentally, unless you change the core thesis of Darling in the Franks, it's a shitty show with bad politics.
right. And then even then, like that doesn't even get into like I think like the character and like writing problems I had. I do not like 02. Like I feel like people make they make like a false dichotomy between like Ichigo stands and like 02 stands. I don't really stand either. I think Ichigo did nothing wrong, but I don't like her as a character. She's kind of eh. I just think she didn't do the thing that would cause fans to send people death threats over it, right? But gosh, where was I going with this? Fuck, I forgot. I was talking about Ichigo, and we were talking about making Franxx gay. That's
Mm-hmm.
why we don't live stream. But gosh, man, I guess that thought is just lost forever. I mean, I don't know. Uh, Someone would probably go back and like figure out what I was trying to say. But Rag, why don't you say a thing and I'll think about the thing that I was going to say.
A thing I'm thinking about,
Yeah.
yeah. What am I even thinking about Darling in the Franxx? I think all of my Darling in the Franxx thoughts are out.
Okay. So I'll think about this a little bit more because I think it was an interesting point. Gosh, it just like left my
I
mind.
think we could come back to this in like a Twitter thread some other time, but I think my end logic is and will continue to be that you can't really change one of the things about Darling in the Franxx. You need to sort of rewrite
Oh,
it
now
from
I
the ground
remember.
up in order to like make it work or make it have acceptable politics. And at a certain point, right, Darling and the Franxx metaphors are all built to be about one thing. So to have those argue the counter thesis, you need to change a lot.
Now I remember. Now I remember. So um, basically, what I was saying is that like all of the stuff that we said would like fix like the thematic issues with Franks, but like I think Franks, and we didn't talk about it much in this episode, but like Franks also has like character issues and like writing problems just like in general. For example, yeah, I was talking about Ichigo. Like I don't really like any of the characters aside from Goro, who is like sidekick, and because he's sidekick, he doesn't really get a lot to do. He apparently goes on a really cool and magical adventure at the end of the series, but we don't get to see it, so who cares? The thing I was gonna say is that Zero Two is actually super insufferable, right? Because in an effort, I guess, to make her like not human in the first 15 episodes, like her whole thing is just that like she doesn't care about other people and whether or not they live or die. Like she literally just cares about like meeting her darling and like riding into Franks with her darling and like killing Klaxosaurus so she becomes human. And like while in her pursuit of that, she literally constantly puts everyone around her in danger all of the time. And anytime any of the other characters like, yo, Zero Two, can you like not literally almost kill us? She's like, they hate me because I'm not human. It's like, no, they hate you because when they're out in the battlefield, you almost got them killed. Like, what? Right. So you need to fix that too. And like, make Zero Two not just like an abject person. Like, a lot of people say, like, oh, well, she was going through trauma or whatever. I mean, trauma doesn't like excuse putting other people in danger. That's the one. That's the one thing you gotta like keep in mind. Yeah, Ichigo and Goro are pretty. They're Goro, I think especially is like he's a solid character. I liked him, and I liked how he liked Ichigo. Um, Sucks that Ichigo didn't like him back, but you know what else?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Um, I
You
think
know what I think
that's
about
basically all the
calling
things.
it here?
Yeah, we can call it. You want to sign off?
Yeah, this is cool. Thank you all for showing up and hanging out. Um, I'm Raghavan. My pronouns are anything other than he or she.
And I'm Mo, he, him, his. Hopefully, I can get some of that stuff for the end of the year. Love you lots. And we'll see you. Oh, I don't have a Patreon end card. Okay. I'll just read out all my patrons.
You can do that.
Yeah. Okay. Hold on. I got them open. So, I guess thanks a special lot to Layla, Emmer, Neil, Fukubi, Minerva, Jack, W, Melon Soda, Salvation Army, Chase, Spooky, Darcirax, Farah, and I guess Ragva, you are a patron of mine. You support the show. Um, Although at this point, I feel like it's a mutual investment. But thanks to all of you so much for supporting us. And if you'd like to help us, we're probably going to be on some podcasting service starting next year because we do have the funds for that now. Thanks so much. Yeah, if you'd like to support us, I'll have a Patreon link in the description. Outside of that, thanks for showing up, and we'll see you next time. Let me end